You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform, and here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. My guest for the first segment of the program, Bright Simmons, is Honorary Vice President, Imani Africa. He's a scholar well sought after globally. Sami Jemfi is National Communications Officer of the NDC. He's a lawyer. Richard Agyapa is Director of Communications of the NPP. Gentlemen, good morning, and thank you very much for making time to join us.
Thanks for having us.
Right. So for our very first issue, we will be going to the mineral investments body that has been giving 1 week ultimatum to provide details on how Ghana spent 12 million on the botched Agyapa deal. The Mines and Energy Committee in Parliament is the one that issued a 7-day ultimatum to Edward Nanayao Koranting, the Chief Executive Officer of the Minerals Income Investment Fund, MIF, asking him to provide further details on the alleged $12 million expenditure on the failed Agyapa royalties deal. Mr. Koranting is required to submit the requested details to the committee by February 27, 2024. There was a disclosure of the 12 million spending on the abortive Agyapa deal by Mr. Koranting during his appearance before the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament. According to him, the government of Ghana subscribed to the deal based on advice from international consultants. Yeah, that's where the issue is, international consultants. If you remember the story, in the heat of the discussions, that's where it appears consultancies consumed 12 million United States dollars. He said, watch him now and listen to him.
Which is a royalties company and fully owned by the Minerals Income Investment Fund. As honorable members are aware, this was put on hold. The main reason for Agyapa was to have the IPO done, both in England and Ghana. But for quite a number of factors or reasons, the president advised that this be put on hold. So Agyapa is on hold at the moment. We are not proceeding as of now. With regards to...
a follow-up to that.
Yes.
Has the MIF made any investment or no expenses in relation to the setup of the Agyapa?
Yes, Honorable Chair. Definitely, because this was an IPO, and as honorable members are aware, for every IPO, consultants, etc. come in. The establishment of an office in the United Kingdom and also in Ghana, etc., come into place. So there have been expenses. The whole idea was for MIF to be reimbursed after the IPO. But as the IPO is now suspended, we until that suspension is lifted, we can't move on with Agyapa.
How much have you spent so far in relation to Agyapa?
I'll get the exact figure, but it should be circa, should be around 12 million. 12 million, yes.
Dollars?
$12 million, right? $12 million.
Okay.
Yes.
Which is hanging now?
Yes, Honorable Chair.
2 million in establishing Agyapa. Now the president has advised that we should suspend it, or you should suspend it. We didn't suspend it because we didn't establish anything. At the end of the day, if Agyapa is not able to carry out its objects, will you consider that we would have incurred a loss, financial loss in this transaction?
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Agyapa, the expense was towards an IPO. So it is important that the MIF and Agyapa And if the Ministry of Finance look at how we could even use the company, it being a royalties company, for other purposes. So the IPO, for such an extensive global IPO, usually such expenses have to be incurred for you to have an IPO. Unfortunately, in the investment bank, well, this is what happens. So it is up to us to look at how we strategize in using this as a royalties company.
Right. So if you remember, there was a special purpose vehicle, SPV, domiciled out of Ghana's jurisdiction. That is in the British Crown Dependency, Jersey. And the special vehicle was called Agyapa Royalties Limited. Initially, it was Asase Royalties Limited. Now, the allegations at the time were that because the entity was going to receive the perpetual right of 75.6% of Ghana's royalties from 48 gold mining leases, comprising the vast majority of Ghana's gold production. The deal was problematic. There were shares to be listed on the London Stock Exchange to raise $500 million in capital from the listing in exchange from gold royalty rights. Ghana was to raise around $500 million in capital from listing 49% of the shares in Agyapa Royalties, valuing the rights at around $1 billion. You remember we engaged Imani and other people continuously on this show, and they said this was vastly undervalued, that the assets were vastly undervalued. This country's mineral royalties were vastly undervalued. According to Imani, at the time, they said that the IPO, for it to be profitable, it must generate at least 2.5 billion. 2.5 billion instead of the 1 billion assessment. So this is where we have come. After all the advocacy and protest, the special prosecutor went into the matter. Before the special prosecutor, we had the Attorney General, then Gloria Akufu, who also issued a report, portions of which, raised major concerns about what was going on. But all of those were subsequently corrected. The special prosecutor got in, and on the 16th of October 2020, issued its report of corruption risk, and was clear that things were really bad. Subsequently, the special prosecutor, right after that, had to resign his office because he said he felt he couldn't continue because there were interference. Meanwhile, 15th of July 2020, the government had laid the bill before Parliament seeking to amend the law that was used for these processes, and a host of things happened. Eventually, Parliament approved the deal. So a group of Ghanaian CSOs went to the ECOWAS court, and the ECOWAS court said, you can't stop the process because your parliament already approved it. Bottom line, the IPO that the MIF CEO spoke about needed to be listed on the London Stock Exchange by the 31st of December, or the agreement will lapse. Things were put on hold. They couldn't list by the 31st of December 2020. So the agreement lapsed. How come? We have spent 12 million United States dollars on this. Let's begin the discussion with a presentation by Bright Simmons. Bright, please, let's have you. Hello, Bright. Please unmute. Okay, we're just getting some little challenge with Bright's connection, but we surely should get that fixed and get to that immediately. In the course of the week, the NDC has been holding a press engagement, the series they call Moment of Truth. And during that, they raised a number of issues about the Agyapa deal and spoke about how it was important to recover this money or a substantial portion of it to assist this country. How much have we gotten from the IMF so far? Remember the first tranche they brought us 6 million? So there's a lot of money that can do a lot for this country. Hello, Bright. We are asking if what the NDC is demanding is possible to recover. And they actually hint that if power changes hands, they will chase the individuals that were seen to be politically exposed, according to the corruption risk assessment that Martin Amidu did. Those who were politically exposed and were involved neck deep in the whole deal, that was said to suggest that this was a group of people, a cabal, that was seeking to create, loot, and share. Typical, and not the interest of Ghana. They say there will be prosecutions if power changes hands. Hello, Bright. We tried to have Bright make his presentation first. Then on the back of the presentation, we will have this discussion with my guests in the studio. The NDC suggests that if we recovered maybe even just half of this money, it will take care of so much of our needs, very many of our needs. Hello, Bright. Technology just failing us this morning in this manner, but we will definitely get Bright back to be able to commence the discussion with him. Okay, I'll try and see how we get Bright as quickly as possible so that we begin the discussion. We certainly must begin with him laying the background and bringing all the facts, some of which you may have forgotten over the period, and what is the real thing at stake. The NDC in its press statement said that the John Dramani Mahama, if he's able to form the next government, will investigate the stinky 12 million Agyapa scam, retrieve all illegal payments made under SAME, and ensure that all the perpetrators are prosecuted. The day of accountability is fast approaching, and no one found culpable will be left off the hook by the next NDC Mahama government. This is a solemn pledge and our charge to keep when, by the grace of God and the Ghanaian people, the NDC assumes the reins of government in 2025. He said, we call on the Ghanaian electorate not to allow President Akufo-Addo and his corrupt cabal of family and friends to install as president their Dr. Baumia, whose sole mission is to cover up the many ills of this remarkably corrupt administration and insulate wrongdoers, including himself, from prosecution. Do we have Bright on now? Okay, right. Hello, Bright.
Hello, can you hear me now, Samson?
I can hear you very clearly. Please, let's go on.
Beautiful. Apologies for whatever it was. Thank you for having done a very good job yourself, laying out the context. That makes my work easy. What I'm going to do is maybe highlight on a few of the things that you do not stress on as much as perhaps we think is necessary for the conversation. Let's remember that officially, as far as the government's position is concerned, Agyapa is still ongoing. That is, the government intends to still do Agyapa, because the last set of communications that have come from the government in respect of this matter, that is before the MIF CEO spoke in Parliament, was to the effect that the government intended to power through with Agyapa. You recall that when this current board of the MIF, the Minerals Investment and Income Fund, was being inaugurated, the Minister of Finance issued an instruction to that board that they should go ahead and do Agyapa based on advice that they had received. They'd also issued a press release in which they stated as a ministry that the president had given them some advice on how to restructure Agyapa and pursue it. So we have to bear that in mind. So those of us that are opposed to that transaction, for us, an ongoing campaign to convince the Ghanaian public that we must force the government to end this Agyapa charade. And this is just a good opportunity to recap the reasons why we think Agyapa is such a problem. The first issue was that the way Parliament was treated was indicative of the total lack of respect for accountability that characterizes projects like Agyapa. There were 5 agreements that were sent to Parliament, in addition to some additional subsidiary matters, and they were sent to Agyapa, to Parliament on the 13th of August. So these matters were laid before Parliament on the 13th of August. You know the way the parliamentary process works. Committee, after it's gone through a number of processes within the committee, it gets to the main house, there could even be debate, and then it's passed. Everything was done in 24 hours to approve Agyapa. From 13th August to 14th August. Everything, 5 agreements, major agreements involving the 97% of the royalties in the mineral sector of Ghana. Because in Ghana, gold constitutes 97% of the mineral royalties that we earn. At that time, manganese is picking up, but in those days, 97%. And then you have a transaction of this magnitude. And we have the sovereign parliament of Ghana sitting on it. And the government forces that parliament within 24 hours to approve it using its majority in parliament. That is the context. Remember also that before we sent this matter to parliament, all the processes had already been undertaken. In fact, the government did not intend to send it to parliament until the Attorney General prevailed on the government. So we had already set up this Asase royalties in Jay-Z. We had already begun process of hiring people and all of that. And so it was very clear that this was completely a formality. It was a mere formality sending it to parliament. There was no need, as far as the government was concerned, to ensure that there was sufficient review by the people's representatives. And that's a very important point, because I'm building up to a point. Secondly, people say that everything that the Attorney General said was addressed. That is Honorable Gloria Kufu in those days. That is not correct. Read her assessment of the agreements of 22nd July. This was basically less than a month before the matter was sent to Parliament. And read some of the concerns that he raised about stabilization clauses. Essentially, we have used Agyapa to create conditions in which whichever company bought these rights that belong to the people of Ghana would have very limited oversight within the Ghanaian jurisdiction. And the Attorney General raised that very clearly. And if you read that 22nd July letter, it was very clear that she saw that the entire arrangement was to the detriment of Ghana. Those issues around stabilization, those issues around perpetual term, the fact that the agreement had no fixed term, no fixed length, essentially because it's tied to the leases where the gold is produced. Every time we discover new gold in those places, those gold resources immediately fall within the purview of Agyapa. And the Attorney General felt that did not make sense. There should be a production cap. If it's 1 million ounces of gold that we are selling forward, let's be clear, so that it does not become an albatross around the neck of Ghana perpetually. That was not addressed. That was still in the agreement, that the agreements that were sent to Parliament. Remember that after this matter happened and the corruption risk assessment had been issued by the special prosecutor, who did an extraordinary job, putting his own career on the line, putting his own political reputation on the line, to try and warn the government and the people of Ghana that this particular agreement had ingredients within it which would definitely lead to corruption. Despite all of that, what we were told in 2021 after the elections was that as far as the government's official position is concerned, the matter must go back to Parliament for further consultation so that Agyapa can proceed. So that was where we were left off. It is not a case that there was any kind of suspension which renders the matter in limbo. Where we were left off is that the people of Ghana were informed that the matter will go back to Parliament for additional consultation, and then the project will be rammed through. Our argument is that Agyapa is inherently bad. So forget these procedural matters that I've raised, forget these contextual matters I've raised. The concept itself is incurably bad. And the goal should be that we get the government to formally terminate it so that this albatross is removed from the neck of the people of Ghana. Why is it bad? We have a good sense of how much gold is being produced today and how much gold is being produced from those leases over the length of time. We pointed out clearly that when you look at the government's analysis, the amount of gold or the quantity of gold involved was not aligned with the reality on the ground. Essentially, what they had put in the analysis differed from what was really the facts. If you look at the prices, the average prices over time, and the analysis that we made that $1,800 was a reasonable price, have been borne out since then. Gold prices are today above $2,000. When you add all of that together and use standard financial techniques, you don't get $1 billion valuation. The government's argument is that, we're going to the stock market, so the stock market will value it. That was not true. The gold rights had not been placed in the company that was going to be listed on the stock exchange. It had been placed in a local company, which was the Ghanaian entity. And it was that entity that was being bought by the one that was going to the stock market. And that price was in the agreement and it fixed at $1 billion. So when we said the whole thing had been undervalued, we're not simply preempting what will happen on the stock market. These were matters of law cast in concrete. Secondly, to simplify the transaction, think of it simply as selling the gold forward. We get a certain quantity of gold because we get 5% on average of all the gold that's produced in this country. Whether or not the company makes a profit, we get a fixed amount when gold is produced. Often we receive it in cash, but we could as well receive it in gold. And gold purchase program is a way in which that particular thing is made manifest, which is that we have a certain portion of the gold that is produced in this country. We want to sell that gold forward. So we want to sell it forward so we can get some money today. What is the implied or implicit price in selling it forward? That was the analysis. And the implicit price in Agyapa was $200. As I've explained to you today, gold prices are above $2,000. So that already gives you a sense. Why is it $200? Well, why is it less than the market price? Less than the market price because we are getting the money today instead of in the future. So what you do is you compare it with other similar transactions and say, what was the implicit price of gold in those transactions? So we look at several transactions around the world where this principle of streaming, where gold income in the future or gold revenues in the future is received today. And we say, what was the implicit price of gold in those transactions? And we found out that in the case of Ghana, this country was being cheated because the price in our transaction, despite all the other advantages, which is that the volume is not capped. So anytime a new discovery is made, that gold is made available to the company. Despite all of that, we're still selling the gold for $200 into the future. You don't take something that is $2,000 and sell it for $200 without significant scrutiny. It requires heightened vigilance. Secondly, they said, but in the end, because we are building a company on the stock market, that company may appreciate in value, or at the very least, the market is wise and the market will know how much to value the company that owns the rights. And because we have some shares in that company, ultimately we'll benefit. The truth of the matter is that it's not the market that sets the share price when you are using book building in an IPO. In the book building process, it is the senior underwriters and the rest calling their friends in the financial industry, their allied contacts in the financial industry, and trying to set an indicative price, which is what the share debuts on the stock market. And people like Joseph Stiglitz, if you don't believe me, read Joseph Stiglitz. He is a Nobel Prize economist. They have looked into this in great detail and found out that very often the possibility that those underwriters will underprice it is very high. Why would they underprice it? because they are selling to people they like in the beginning, or people that they are in close business relationship with in the beginning, before the shares get into the stock market. You sell it to them that way. When the shares do open on the stock market, you get a huge pop, is what you call it. So you get a huge appreciation, and that money goes to the people who set up the deal, not to the people of Ghana. Because ultimately, that price always comes back down. We looked at a lot of streaming companies which are listed on the stock market and shown the trajectory of their stock prices. Invariably, almost 90-something% of them had seen a pop and then significant depreciation. So even this thing put it on the stock market is not an efficient way to do what we wanted to do, and I'll prove that in a second. Secondly, because the underwriter sets the prices and allocates shares and the rest of it, there's massive room for collusion. Now, coming back to the picture of the money that you have mentioned, the $12 million, there are 2 points to bear in mind. One is that IPOs are very expensive. Putting a company on the stock market is very expensive. Nobody doubts that. In fact, one of our reasons for thinking that Agyapa was very poorly thought through is that the argument was that instead of borrowing money or doing what in the trade is called securitization, where you have some money in the future, but you take the money at present, and the person lending you the money takes control of the future income. That transaction, the argument was that such a thing would be too expensive and using equity would be better for Ghana. So we said, what is the implied price of this transaction? Essentially, what is the implied interest in the arrangement we are making? Because what we are doing looks like borrowing money, because we are taking the money up front, and then in the future, money that will have come to us will go to someone. That's very similar to interest. If we had done that in the normal markets and we had gold and just a collateralized gold transaction, because we have gold income in the future, like we did with Esler and the rest, we could have done a deal for maybe 6% or something like that, because it's fully collateralized. Now, here is the challenge. In Agyapa, we're going to get $500 million. But because it's an IPO process, we're going to end up spending within the range of between $36 to $45 million if the transaction had ended. So you take that out of what you were going to get, and that gives you a sense of the interest that we will have incurred if we had gone the Agyapa route, instead of simply going to the market, saying we have some gold, we want some money up front, give us that money and collateralize it to the gold. It is like 3 or 4 times more expensive going the path that they took than simply going and borrowing the money. And that's very important. The second thing is the fact that in the current complaints that have come forward since this disclosure was made about how much we've spent on Agyapa, we forget the fact that this is not everything. The underwriting fees have not yet come. So when you look through the list, you see that all the investment banks and those kinds of things are not yet mentioned. Those monies will be paid if Agyapa goes through. But the question is, have we paid them any money or have we incurred any liability? That has not been disclosed. So all the Merrill Lynch's and all of those things that you were hearing, all those investment bankers sitting in London you were hearing, were they doing this for free? That is not in there, because the argument is that it went through Imara. We don't have any disclosure of the full list of entities that Imara paid. That is why you don't see some of the Ghanaian investment banks and others that in their discussions, we all know were part of the transaction, African Legal Associates and the rest. You don't see them here because that full list is not yet out. We also argue that if this had continued and Agyapa had been consummated, what would have happened is that Ghana would have lost control of its assets. So any future government will not be able to rely on, on mineral royalty income, which today is almost 30% of all our minerals revenue in the country. Now, you are going to tie the hands of a future government in perpetuity. Money that comes to the country and is used to fix roads and things like that. One government is going to go and borrow just $500 million and give it up for eternity using a stock market process, which will have led to a situation where the independent directors control everything and we don't know who these directors are. There were some option on the stock market to use the sovereign listing process. This government refused to use that process. They used the normal listing process. And when you look at the rules and the agreements that we were going to have, we forced Parliament to ratify. It says clearly that the power to take decisions, including how to spend dividends and things like that, were going to be in the hands of a very small group of directors who none of us have ever been introduced to. Secondly, because it was listed in this JC Trust location, we would never have known who the real owners are, because they will have used trusts, and by using trusts and nominee companies, there is no way you can go to the stock market and find out the real owners. So this notion that because of the stock market, we'll know who own it and etc. was completely misleading and completely untrue. In fact, there have been investigation in the US Senate and others which we disclosed during the period of the advocacy, that shows that one of the greatest ways to hide ownership of equity was to use tax haven jurisdictions with strong secrecy requirements like JC, and then use trust entities where you put the shares through a trust entities, use nominees to disclose that to the stock market. Go and look at Atlantic Lithium, for instance, the company getting our lithium, and look at the list of owners. You see that they're all nominee companies. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong, but I'm just saying that you will not see the owners of the company if you went to the stock market. That is not correct. And so we would not have known who controlled Agyapa. More importantly than not, above everything else, we didn't do Agyapa in 2020. It's now been 4 years. The amount of money we've generated from gold since then, just for the last 2 years, is 70%. If we count from 2020, we've already got the $500 million that we're going to get, and for that reason, was going to hold hostage gold revenues that future governments will use to develop this country. We've already ended since the 2020. If you take $150 million as the average royalties intake a year, that's $600 million. Why on God's good earth will we have gone to the stock market, taking $500 million, put our resources there, stack it somewhere in Jersey, under the control of directors that none of us have ever been introduced to, just for $500 million, and then claim that the 51% that we own will appreciate when other streaming companies have not shown that appreciation, and therefore the likelihood that we'll have even have got dividends ever was very, very threatened. How on earth will we have done that? That is the point. The issue is not just about the $12 million spent. More will be spent. We think 3 times more will be spent if this process continues to the end, because they have to now pay underwriters and investment bankers. And for that reason, and given the fact that we think it's incurably bad, the government must formally tell us they've stopped pursuing Agyapa. That is the issue, Samson.
One or two questions for you. We know that in 2023, the ECOWAS court delivered a judgment in the matter that the CSOs, Transparency International, which was eventually disqualified in the process, Ghana Integrity Initiative and the Anti-Corruption Coalition of Ghana, the matter that they took before the ECOWAS court. The court gave a judgment in favor of the government. And we know that government communicators have used this judgment as a victory song, so to speak, to say that there was nothing wrong with Agyapa. And so it confirms what they were saying all along, that you, the CSOs, were getting things wrong. For example, there were allegations that Gabriel Asarochiridako's firm benefited in excess of $2 million and so on. He came public to correct that, to clarify that. And he said that his firm got only about $103,000 and it was not paid by government. It was paid by the main transaction advisor, to his firm and not to him, so to speak. So what do you make of the point? This is sort of a good thing for the government to use as a basis to continue, that even the ECOWAS court has said the people don't have any case. I'll just read a small portion of that judgment at page 30, paragraph 76. It says the court is quick to state that the proof required in this instance of a claim for breach under Article 21F of the ACHPR is that the Commonwealth of the people of Ghana has been disposed of in a way that does not benefit them, thereby depriving them of it. The court had already stated that what this case was a preemptive strike, and they didn't think that it was right to bring this case. Then it concluded here that what this court has before it are in fact evidence of processes that flow from democratic institutions and have gained approval from the people's representative, i.e. the parliament. So parliament had approved all the agreements. So why can you go to a court to want to set it aside?
Okay. So 5 quick points. One, it's important to remember that it's not all the CSOs that came together against Agyapa that went to the courts. It was not there were like almost 40 or something CSOs that created the CSO on extractive matters. It wasn't all of those, that it wasn't even done in the name of that movement or that alliance. This was Transparency International and very respected local anti-corruption organization that decided that on the basis of the special prosecutor's investigation, they had a case.
That's right.
So that's number one. That's very important to clarify. So I, for instance, don't know anything about these proceedings. I didn't testify. I wasn't part of preparing it, etc. The second point to note is that it was brought only pursuant to the Human Rights Convention within the Regional Human Rights Convention.
That's right.
So this was not a matter that was looking into the propriety of the deal. It was looking about the human rights of Ghanaians on the basis that the assets, these gold resources, are part of our Commonwealth. And so have somebody's human rights been breached because the government wants to do this? That's very important to bear in mind. So it doesn't look as if a court has looked into the matters I have been talking about today, the financial propriety, etc. The third thing to bear in mind is that only 25% or so of the ECOWAS court's judgments are obeyed by the governments. So essentially, when the governments get a good deal, then they make a lot of noise about it. But the vast majority of judgments that are issued by the ECOWAS court are ignored by the governments. So if the government respected the courts in the way that they are trying to use the court as a means of legitimacy, then they would enforce the judgments of the court, which they don't do for the most part. The fourth point to note is that the basis of the arguments was what you lawyers know very well, which is the principle of subsidiarity. If there is some other entity where the decisions are best taken, another entity, typically higher up, will not interfere unnecessarily. Secondly,
the political question
like
doctrine.
Executive, yes, where there's also a basis on which a part of the government has taken a decision, courts do something we call deference. Now, look at what happened in Ghana. The government used its political power to pass this through parliament. As I explained to you, it was in 24 hours, 5 agreements. Something, you were a lawyer, a simple will, or a conveyance, something like that. Will you be able to do it in 24 hours? If you were really being serious, then to consider 5 agreements to dispose of access to this magnitude or of this magnitude, doing that in 24 hours. But the fact of the matter is that it's not the duty of a regional court to impugn the democratic institutions of Ghana, particularly given that all of these matters happened based on the treaty. There's an ECOWAS treaty. The treaty limits the functions of regional institutions versus governments. So if a government in Ghana has sat down, gone through all the processes and managed to use law to achieve a particular end, you think a regional court, based on the Human Rights Convention, is going to try and overturn it? It's not going to happen.
Right.
So we did not expect, that a court of that nature will try and stop something like that. Even Ghanaian courts perhaps will not, but I think the people of Ghana should.
Right. My second question is, when the NDC demands that there ought to be recoveries of the $12 million spent, is this something, a demand you think is reasonable and it is something that can happen?
The demand flows from that extraordinary work that the special prosecutor, Honorable Martin Amidu, did during that period. That demand flows from therefrom. The government's response, the special prosecutor's corruption risk assessment, was extremely legalistic. It, in effect, tried to prove that because powers exist, those powers can be used anyhow. So, for example, a deputy minister can sign because the law allows that to happen. We went to parliament and got an amendment, etc., etc. That was not the basis of the special prosecutor's assessment. It's about the fact that everything was done to ram this through, even though it was against the interests of the people. And there were reasons, as I've given, some of them that I've given, that suggest that Agyapa could be a conduit for massive corruption, the way it has been designed. That matter was never addressed. Look at the Ministry of Finance's response. Read it carefully. They don't tackle any of these things. Everything they did was to try and establish that they had a power by under law to do the things they've done, and they've done them. So if the NDC makes an argument on broader strategic grounds, as well as on ethical grounds, and say that we don't think the way that these monies were spent were in our interest, and that they want to recover it from the companies and the rest of it, of course, it will be very complicated because you have contractual matters and you have a state party, you have these private companies. We have not seen the agreements. The starting point for the NDC will be to call for the agreements between all of these entities and the subsidiary agreements between those companies and all the subcontractors, not all of whom have been disclosed. That's number one. Number two is to ask for the compliance history of these companies, because they were still set up in Ghana, in Jersey, etc., etc. What is their compliance history? Number three, to ask for the liabilities that are still being built up. Because remember that when you set up a company, there are compliance costs that continue. I think that NDC can do a much more systematic job before it gets to the point where it can do recoveries. It needs much more information.
And I asked that question also bearing in mind that once there was no listing on the London Stock Exchange by the 31st of December 2020, the agreement had lapsed.
But the agreement can be reinstated, because within the agreement were provisions that allow for reinstatement of the agreement based on mutual consent of the parties. But remember that, who are the agreements with though? A lot of the agreements were structured between Agyapa in Jersey and Agyapa in Ghana. People forget that. Some of them, of course, structured with state entities like the MIF and the Bank of Ghana and others. If the government insists that this is a good thing and it wishes to reinstate those agreements, it can reinstate them by having those agreements re-signed. But the point we are making is that the whole Agyapa idea is incurably bad. We should not take all the most assured income. You know why I say it's the most assured income? Government gets royalty money, whatever happens in the international market and whatever happens to the companies. The rest of the money we get, corporate tax and the rest, are dependent on volatile factors. For that reason, every government in the future can only rely on the royalties when it comes to real forward planning. So to take all of those, sell it forward at $200 an ounce, and use that money for very little, because $500 million is not going to do much for you. As you explained yourself, Samson. What will $500 million do for a country like Ghana, where at one point last year, we're getting $23 billion in forex throughput through our banks? $23 billion of forex in the first half of 2023 went through our banks. This is not a country that $500 million can make a material difference to. Why will you sell forward our gold for $200 an ounce when it sells for $2,000 today, just for $500 million?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
My final question to you briefly, you have done and have been consistent about the assessment and how we are selling Ghana cheap, our royalties cheap in this respect.
Yes.
Beyond that, you know, some of the things that actually got the debate very heated and suspicious was the involvement of the law firm of Gabi Asare-Chidako and the role of Yao Safomafo's son. Is it not possible to look at things from the way you look at them without looking at the individuals that are politically exposed and allowing that to cloud, you know, the opportunity of a fair assessment of the process?
So as we've stated, the procedural lineage of this entire transaction is contaminated. The way it went about, you know, forced through parliament, etc. The special prosecutor did an extraordinary job. It was a very technical piece of work, but most people are not taking their time to read it, to uncover procurement bid rigging, which in this country is very hard because of the nature of our procurement institutions. The PPA will approve anything we send to it if you are politically powerful enough. It's a completely worthless institution at this point. So when you use the PPA law and things like that in the current institution and the rest, you can get any result you want. What the special prosecutor did was to extraordinarily and excellently unpack that procurement rig agenda. And some of that was exacerbated because you had politically exposed persons. I'll give you a simple example. Why can you claim that? How can you claim that Agyapa was being done in our interest as Ghanaians? And up to today, nobody has ever disclosed the directors of Agyapa. You, Samson, you were a very prominent journalist in Ghana. If I ask you who are the directors of Agyapa, do you know? If I ask you who are the officers of Agyapa, do you know how they got there? How was this conferring recruitment that they said somehow managed to land on the desk of the son of the senior presidential advisor? You ask a company, a global company, look for the best Ghanaian to manage this. And they look across the country. They find someone, another investment banker, no background in minerals or mining, hasn't run an IPO company before, etc. But somehow he's politically exposed. I think all of these matters must be properly inquired into. How did they recruit those people? They said they paid $1.5 million to them already, the staff of Agyapa. You don't take $1.5 million of a struggling country like this and distribute it among so-called directors and officers that the country don't know about, whose credentials have not been explained to us, and how they got the job not explained to us. So I think there's a basis for that assessment as well. It's just that we were focused on Agyapa in and of itself.
In
all Ghanaians have yet got into.
In 1 minute, some of the viewers have sent messages, and they are making a comparison between this and SML. Is that a fair assessment to do?
Yes, because the procedural history of SML is very, very dangerous as well. How do you come to a conclusion that 0.75% of all of Ghana's minerals and $0.75 every time we sell a barrel of oil should go to a company, when that particular company was a mushroom company? It was set up in 2017 by with no history at all in revenue assurance, in the line of work for which it's supposed to be doing. All the revenue assurance auditors in Ghana who have been doing revenue assurance work for telcos, for mines, etc., we didn't find any of them. Somehow we managed to source a big contract like this to a timber merchant and entitle that timber merchant to 0.75% of all our mineral revenues. How much does the government get in royalties? 5%. A company, just because it's going to help us do some auditing, gets 0.75%, and we don't know who these people are. Up to date, nobody has been able to show us who the founder of SML is in terms of or in relation to their capacity and competence for the assignment they've been given. Why do we do this to ourselves in this country? We have to be able to be bold and tell politicians that they cannot take us for a ride. Explain things to us clearly, show accountability. Don't just do things and say because you have the power and the law is with you, you're on your side, you can do whatever you want. I don't think that's how you build a functional, sophisticated society of any kind.
Bryce Simmons, thank you so very much. Bryce Simmons is Honorary Vice President of Imani Africa. We will be right back, and my guests in the studio will also have their turn. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. First, a couple of messages from our viewers. And Dr. Richmond says that apart from it being naked robbery, a little research paper conducted by myself from 2014 to 2022 shows Ghana exported 43 billion US dollars worth of gold and got US dollars 6.4 billion or 14.8%. The existing deals with gold producers is naked robbery. A Agyapa deal will make more poorer and poorer. How do we mortgage Ghana's future for meager resources from gold through a Agyapa deal? This is naked robbery and has to be stopped. Then PK in Elembele says, why on earth will leaders of a country decide to collateralize our gold for 500 million US dollars in such a fictitious deal? Private firms of government leaders will definitely offer advisory role, consultancy services, just to let the deal go and receive their percentage cut. Heads will roll when the reign of power changes in Ghana in 2025. Why is this government so bent on this Agyapa deal? Matters of this deal have a huge risk implication to the country. This is not an efficient business decision to help this country. From bank guarantee to insurance guarantee with respect to PDS, Agyapa deal, why didn't the team get... Okay, so thank you. That's a long enough message. Prince Henry in Koforidua says, same NPP that in opposition criticized soul sourcing is now practicing more soul sourcing in power. Hey, MPP, ye Cobra Ampa. This is why Ghanaians must vote out the NPP for them to account to us after the new government led by John Mahama has taken over on January 7, 2025. The fact is, the MPP led by Dr. Bawumia has institutionalized corruption and made corruption one of their sole interventions. Hey, party here sika ampa. Agyapa royalties is just one chendi and nothing more. Agyapa Royalties is a photocopy of SML. Simple. The future is pregnant. What does that mean? Now, Musa Abator in Sawase says, thanks to people like Bright Simmons, they have been consistent in providing loads of documents to back the claims that a Agyapa deal is not going to benefit Ghanaians. Anybody who is supporting this stinky deal don't wish Ghana well. Even before the contract sees the light of day, $12 million of taxpayers' money has gone into private pockets. Corruption at its peak. This is a longer one from Kweku Entry Boesiako. He says, my understanding of, okay, that's on a different subject. Thank you very much. I will pause here and hear from our guests who have been here in the last 1 hour or so. So let's begin with you, Sami Gyamfi, who led the Moment of Truth press conference and, decided to bring this back in such a manner after the developments at the Parliament's Public Accounts Committee.
Well, these are very sad times and painful times for the people of this country. As I was listening to Bryce Simmons explain, unpack this whole Agyapa scam, I felt like crying for Ghana. And I felt so because it is heart-wrenching for our duty bearers, the very leaders that we have elected and trusted with our mandate and with the responsibility to manage our limited resources and to apply same judiciously for the benefit of all of us, to come together to shortchange the way, in a manner, this whole Agyapa deal sought to shortchange the country, as explained by Bryce Simmons. He has set the context right. You have done so as well, so I won't waste time on that. The bottom line is that for us in the NDC, we hold the position that the Agyapa deal was and is inimical to the interests of the Ghanaian people. Because what it basically sought to do was to sell forward our mineral royalties for a pittance and at a grossly undervalued price, as posterity has shown. If you do the analysis of what they sought to do, we're virtually giving our gold resources for $200 per ounce, when today posterity has shown that the price is $2,000 and above. So clearly this was a ripoff, and it was going to deprive future governments of critical mineral royalties for the development of this country. It was on this basis that throughout the advocacy on this Agyapa deal, we took a principled, patriotic stance to stand with the people of this country. That is why we boycotted the approval process, which was a sham in Parliament. And that is why our then flag bearer, who is still our current flag bearer, back then promised to abrogate the Agyapa deal if he had been elected in 2020. Well, that position has not changed. But today, what is of concern to us, what we are totally appalled and disgusted by, is the disclosure, the shocking disclosure by the CEO of MIF before the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament, to the effect that about $12 million, equivalent to 153 million Ghana cedis, which is equivalent to 1.5 trillion old Ghana cedis, has been spent on the botched, aborted Agyapa deal. That is what is of concern to us. That is what we are shocked and totally scandalized by. And we are very clear in our minds, Samson, that this so-called expenditure, like one of your texts said, is nothing but naked robbery, naked thievery, naked corruption, and an abuse of the public purse. Those payments constitute willfully causing financial loss to the state, which is a crime under our laws, and that is why we are saying that the monies must be retrieved and the perpetrators must not go scot-free. Now, that promise we have made, that decision we have taken, is not going to be difficult at all. For me, it's a very simple, open and shut matter. Because, Samson, you know, as my senior at the bar, that you cannot put something on nothing and expect it to stand. The Agyapa royalties mineral investment agreements that went to Parliament for approval, these expenditures we are all outraged about, that we are talking about, are all fruits of a poisonous tree. The tree that has given us this, that gave birth to these fruits, these transactions, is poisonous. And therefore, the payments made, which are the fruits I'm talking about, the agreements arising from same cannot stand the test of time. Because this whole Agyapa scam came about through what is called the mandate agreement, signed between the government of Ghana and so-called transaction advisors, specifically Imara Corporate Finance of South Africa and their local partners, Data Bank. Now, we know from the corruption risk assessment report of the Office of Special Prosecutor, the findings of which have not been impeached or controverted by anybody in government as we speak, that the processes leading to that mandate agreement and the mandate agreement itself was unlawful. It was unconstitutional. It was illegal. It was null, void, and of no effect. Why? Because number one, the special prosecutor has found beyond every reasonable doubt that there was procurement rigging and therefore a clear breach of the public procurement law. In the sense that Imara, which eventually won the bid to be the main transaction advisor, was not part of the first four companies who were presented to the Public Procurement Authority for approval relative to the restricted tendering process the government sought to use. They were not part of that. They were smuggled in at the second stage. Again, Data Bank, which is a company founded by the then finance minister, who still has business interests in that company, was not part of that process, but was also smuggled in on the basis of a clause, a condition that required the companies who were bidding for this transaction advisor role to show that they had an eligible Ghanaian firm for their bids to be considered favorably. And that condition was not part of the initial request that went to the Public Procurement Authority. These were all done post facto, after the fact, in clear breach of the Public Procurement Law. If you read page 10 and 11 of Martin Amidu's Corruption Risk Assessment Report, he gives you all the details of this procurement rigging that went on and why the processes leading to the mandate agreement were flawed and null and void for breach of the Public Procurement Law. Again, the payments are unlawful and therefore null and void because they arise from a mandate agreement which sins against Section 4, Section 7, Section 23, 4, and so on of the Public Financial Management Act, in the sense that that agreement was signed for and on behalf of the government of Ghana by a person who had no locus, no legal capacity to sign that agreement. It was signed by a Deputy Minister of Finance, Charles Adubuaye, who, under the Public Financial Management Act, is not the chief spending officer of the Ministry of Finance and therefore lacks the legal capacity to commit the Republic of Ghana to such an agreement. Therefore, the agreement is void ab initio. Thirdly, the agreement is unlawful and the payments, and so are the payments arising from same. Because according to Martin Amidu, and this is a fact, not even according to Martin Amidu, the fact is the main transaction advisor, Imara Corporate Finance of South Africa, is a foreign company. And therefore, their involvement in the transaction made the transaction an international business or economic transaction within the meaning of Article 181, Clause 5 of the 1992 Constitution. The Attorney General versus Faro Atlantic case is clear. The Waterville, Woyome, Isophoton cases are clear. By virtue of the involvement of that foreign company in that so-called mandate agreement, the deal had to be approved by Parliament. But that was not done, which makes the deal unconstitutional and null and void. Therefore, you cannot put something on nothing and expect it to stand. In the sense that government cannot claim to have made valid payments to any transaction advisor, being Imara or data bank belonging to the cousin of President Akufo-Addo, Ken Uforiata, or their external consultants. The payments which were made to White and Case, the payments which were made to Benchi Enchel of Asa Nkuma, the payments which were made to African Legal Associates are all unlawful, null and void, and of no effect because they arise from this mandate agreement which violates several laws of this country. And so to that extent, the state must recover these monies. And we need to do so not only because the transactions are unlawful, but mainly because Ghanaians have not benefited anything from these transactions and these payments. There's been no value that has accrued to the people of this country for the 153 million Ghana cedis that has been wasted on this transaction.
I do not want to suggest that every matter must be litigated in a court, and very sensitive, politically, inclined issues should be left with one judge or two or three judges to determine our fate.
Yeah.
But you make judicial pronouncements. You say unlawful, illegal, unconstitutional, null and void. There is no judicial pronouncement to that effect.
Just like when Atayi was terrorizing everybody in this country, there was no judicial determination at the time that he was an armed robber, but we knew he was an armed robber. You don't become an armed robber after the judicial. You become an armed robber based on your acts. Before we can even take you to court for armed robbery, we should have evidence, and we should have taken the position that based on the evidence and the facts, you are an armed robber. And so you are a suspect. So we are saying that based on the facts, based on the evidence, which have not been controverted in any way, that as Adubuahin signed the agreement, and that per the Public Financial Management Act, he didn't have the locus to do so. Number two, that the agreement involved a foreign company, which made it an international business transaction within the meaning of Article 181, Clause 5. And therefore, on the basis of the Faro Atlantic case, the Waterville, Isophoton, Woyome cases, the agreements are null and void. Again, the fact that the transaction involved procurement rigging, because it is a fact that Imara was not part of the first four companies that were shortlisted and presented to the PPA for approval. Neither was Data Bank part of that process, and so on. And the fact that the one who had overall oversight responsibility over the procurement exercise was the finance minister, who had a business interest in Data Bank, whose foreign partner was selected as the transaction advisor through that opaque procurement process. So to that extent, we as a political party hold the view that the transactions, specifically the mandate agreement and the processes leading to same, are unlawful, null and void, and of no effect. For which reasons any payments made under same are unlawful and recoveries. Exactly.
Okay. And then there will be prosecutions.
Prosecutions, exactly. And we are saying so that apart from it being unlawful and all that, I mean, what have we as a people benefited from those payments? 153 million Ghana cedis. Do you know what that could have done for us, Samson? Not too long ago on this very platform, you were discussing the closure of the RENA unit of Kolebo.
4 million Ghana cedis.
Over 4 million Ghana cedis indebtedness of government. 19 Ghanaians painfully died because the government of Akufo-Addo and Bawumia and the MPP said they don't have 4 million cedis to clear that debt. Only yesterday, I was watching Joy News, and I saw the new CEO of Komfo-Anokye Teaching Hospital complaining that they don't even have enough dialysis machines to treat Ghanaians suffering from various kidney conditions. As I speak to you today, look at the problems confronting us. We are a bankrupt nation. We can't even pay our debt. National service personnel for 4 months have not been paid their allowances. NAPCO beneficiaries are owed 9 months arrears of their meager allowances. There are communities in Ghana today where children are still schooling under trees. People are drinking water from streams which look like chocolates in this country. There are many communities in this country where even if a snake should bite you, you cannot get a cheap compound or a clinic or any health facility for treatment within 100 kilometers. And you take 153 million cedis and waste it on something that you yourself, you have abandoned, you have suspended. We don't know the state, the thing is dead underwater. You understand? We have not derived any benefit from it. And the agreements on the basis of which you claim to have paid these consultants are unlawful. Why must we not recover our
The issue of the dialysis places you are using as examples, they likely may be with us for a longer time because, as you said, we have heard from Kofanochi also, very sad developments there. There should be about 100 machines like that there. Kolebu should have these machines in their hundreds, but we can't seem to afford them to put them there. And those of us who are managing the state, when we are in need, we fly, we catch
outside the country,
the next flight.
Exactly.
I saw kids from this school, Trinity Star School in Dansuman. They had to contribute, I think, about 100 and almost 200,000 to go and support the dialysis unit at Konfanoche, at Kolebu Teaching Hospital. But the question is, once Parliament gave its blessing, don't you see that the potential of making any recoveries and making any prosecutions will be zero?
Not at all. Because Parliament gave its blessing primarily to the Mineral Royalties Investment Agreement, authorizing Agyapa to go and list on the stock exchange and do the investment they sought to do. You understand? Parliament did not approve the mandate agreements engaging the transaction advisors. What Parliament approved has not been executed. It's been suspended. So no payments have been made under what Parliament approved. The payments have been made under what Parliament did not approve. The mandate agreement engaging the so-called consultants, Gabi, Kenoforia Test Company, Eastern Commerce Legal Firm, and so on. Those are the people who are the beneficiaries of this $12 million unlawful payments we are talking about. Okay. So we are saying that post facto parliamentary approval by the MPP majority cannot whitewash or exculpate the corporates of this scam from liability, because, like I said, those agreements are fruits of a poisonous tree. That tree, the tree that gave birth to myth, the tree that gave birth to Agyapa, the tree that gave birth to all those payments is a mandate agreement. Yeah. Once that mandate agreement is illegal and unconstitutional, no payments made under same are valid and can stand the test of time.
Right.
And so I want to conclude.
My final question to you here before you come in here is this one. Nonetheless, I like to say that when we refer to Bentiencho, we know is your biggest private legal firm in this country.
Of course.
It's famed and does business across the globe.
Of course.
Right.
We won't take that away from them at all.
No, the fact that I see you mention Ace to it, and as if it's a one-man
he's a key actor there. And he used to be very regular on this show, and I remember a lot of things he said about payments such as this, which violated laws of this country.
What do you say when you are told that this agreement, this project you are so against, in the year 2011, the NDC was in government, and the NDC actually submitted a process for the purposes of doing the same thing, the Ghana Gold Company. What do you say to that?
And that process or that company undervalued our gold royalties, and that company engaged in procurement rigging, that company engaged in breaches of the Public Financial Management Act and the supreme law of the land. In
principle, it was supposed to hold our gold royalties and equity interests.
The fact that under the NDC, it was contemplated that we could securitize or monetize our gold royalties in a certain way is not to say that we did what has been done. In any case, that contemplation was never crystallized and never implemented because the government did not see wisdom in it. We abandoned it. We never engaged in these gross violations of the laws of this country. Neither did we occasion a $12 million loss to the state like they have done. And so when people, like you said, every Ghanaian, and this for me is very important, must be interested in the recovery of these illegal payments, these wasteful payments, and the punishment of the perpetrators.
You're actually tied.
And the role we have, of course, and the role we have is by ensuring that the people responsible for these loots are booted out of office. Our surest bet of getting genuine accountability is when we elect the nation builder John Dramani Mahama, who has shown both in office and out of office that he has a clear will to investigate this matter and retrieve the funds for the state and punish the perpetrators. I'm just concluding, the same cannot be said about our main opponent, who is himself an accomplice in these corrupt schemes, a beneficiary of these corrupt schemes, and who has not indicated any willingness, any desire to even investigate these matters, let alone prosecute people and make retrievals for the state. Finally, Samson.
You're referring to Dr. Bawumia.
Dr. Bawumia is the one I'm talking about. You know that he is himself.
There is no finding of wrongdoing against him.
Oh, there is a finding of wrongdoing against him in the FTI report relative to the PDS deal for his unlawful conduct in changing what Parliament had done, changing a condition precedent into condition subsequent when he had no power to do so, and a requirement of a bank guarantee,
you always go
which
to
caused us a debt of a loss of $2 billion. I'm just concluding by saying that anybody who seeks to hide behind a ruling or a judgment by an ECOWAS court on a human rights matter, the ratio decidendi of which is basically that your own state institution, key among which is your parliament, approved the deal. And the harm you are complaining of has not occurred. You are being preemptive. And so we can't do anything about it. It's a partaker of this heinous crime which has been committed against
Richard,
let's not engage in such justification.
So we are back to Agyapa again. Agyapa has been such a divisive, project. The president saw wisdom in ordering its suspension. This led to special prosecutor, the first special prosecutor, leaving his office, resigning, because he complained about interference by the president on the presidency and government. Did you are surprised yourself that we are talking about money in the region of $12 million spent only at the level before the suspension? Are you not?
Samson, how I wish that we have all day to discuss this matter, because there's a lot of moving parts to it. There is a Bryce Simpson angle, which
Bryce
Simmons angle, which is entirely conjecture.
Really?
Yeah. Conclusions based on conjecture.
I don't think that's an accurate statement to make.
No, it is. I think you should allow me that, because
I will allow you.
That's my view, my understanding of everything he presented.
No, but you cannot say conjecture when you have shown the evidence.
Because the evidence, what is the evidence?
The evidence of the cost and the value of the gold.
You are a lawyer. Evidence is crystal. Evidence is empirical.
Okay, show us the contrary. Go ahead. Show us the contrary.
The issue is that the problem with Agyapa, and you see, it's unfortunate that we are relitigating a matter that was heavily litigated in the 2020 election, and the NDC lost it. Which means that Ghanaians understand, except that today we are exciting and inciting people based on some false emotion, talking about the unfortunate issue to do with dialysis machine at Kolebu to be a basis. But you know something, I know one thing about the listeners of your program. These are balanced, independent people who understand the issue. So Sami is not going to come here and begin to use that cheap emotional trick on people on this program. The matters to do with Agyapa is clear. Now, we're supposed to start from now, because the balance of it is known to Ghanaians, but we're supposed to continue from the 12 million issue, okay? But I'll go back a little bit to clear the fact of it being something done to rob this country of any value to benefit some people. That's not true. Entirely not true. Somebody is here very comfortably quoting Amidou and all of that, trying to say his report is Holy Bible, but he is the same person who said that Amidou cannot earn his confidence, or he doesn't trust Amidou. He is on record to have said that Amidou lacks credibility. But today, he's sitting in the studio amplifying Amidou. But you see, what is the value of that, more or less, that preemptive investigation done by
corruption risk
assessment done by Amidou? What is the value of it? One, it is mostly preemptive, trying to impute motive on something that has not happened. And you, Samson, you are a reputed lawyer. You cannot convict anybody. You cannot prosecute anybody based on suspicion. You cannot. Okay, you cannot. And that's why there's a mandate on you who alleges to prove beyond reasonable doubt that what you are claiming actually did happen. So you cannot.
The law is that a multitude of suspicions do not constitute proof.
Exactly.
They are put together.
Exactly.
But in this case,
yes.
Look at it. Look at it.
We're looking at it. It hasn't resulted that, except if your politics wants you to conclude that it leads to something. That's what you will do. And that's exactly what happened in Parliament, because the matter to do with Agyapa, which was started in 2018 by the passage of the MIF Act, was collaboratively done in Parliament. The NDCs participated in that. Subsequently, in 2020, when the amendment was required to create the special purpose vehicle, it was participatory. The NDC was there, consultative, the representative of the people, the NDC parts across this country, 275 MPs sat in that chamber, debated the subject, and came to a conclusion and say, let's go ahead. So the
as a legal framework.
The premise is that. So our people agreed to advance with Agyapa through parliamentary processes. Now, where the NDC is making a case, after they have approved the SPV, a few days later, the transaction agreements came, sit and approve that also. Then they started raising questions, what's the money going to be used for? That was where this whole thing started. They started asking questions, what's the money going to be used for? How substantial is that? The documents are before you. You're asking what the money is going to be used for. I, for the life of me, don't understand, because you are sitting in Parliament asking that question. If that money real is going to be used for anything, I bet you that Parliament will have input in that. So the end is, and this whole Agyapa thing is a political situation that we encountered. There is nothing criminal about it, and that's why I said Bright Simmons' position is conjecture, because you are trying to impugn motive on something that has not happened. And Samson, where we sit now, I can impugn right now that Samson, the way you are asking certain questions of me, you are an NDC sympathizer. Would it be okay for me to conclude on that basis?
Well, it happens every day.
Yes, but I'm saying that
I'm used to it. Somebody actually says, Samson Ainini's last question to Bryce Simmons is mischievous and an attempt to wash Gabi clean. So this is obviously an NDC person.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me, an objective person, I would say that person is not being fair to you, and that person cannot conclude because doesn't have the evidence to do so. So everything Samir and his party is doing cannot be in the interest of this country. It is, for once, about their parochial politics. And in fact, Ghanaians saw through this in 2020, and they voted against them. And I am telling you, apart from, and I say this very advisedly, that in certain jurisdictions they use the word low information voters. People who don't appreciate, because this whole Agyapa thing is complex. Samson, I hope you appreciate that. It's a complex, abstract concept to try to create value for this country. So not a lot of people understand what Agyapa is. And so it is possible, it is easy to leverage that confusion and want to extract political value out of it. And that's what Sami is doing.
But Bryce Simmons and his team break it down for all of us.
You see,
it's just simply mortgaging your...
It is not, it's not even mortgaging. You said that earlier and I told you it's not mortgaging. It is not mortgaging because it is an attempt to seek value. for this country. Now, there are multiple income streams that will generate out of the Agyapa if you go and list on the stock market. The incidental appreciation in share value over time, that becomes value for us. And also the investments that we'll be making in mining companies who will be creating value, and therefore the appreciation in that value becomes returns for the state. So it is not a bad thing. And it's unfortunate that the NDC is perpetrating this lie on Ghanaians. And I want to look fair and square in the faces of Ghanaians and say, look, we sit here and we're saying that government is borrowing to develop this country. The Agyapa instrument is designed to generate revenue, capital, and capital to do expansive developmental work for this country, which will not be on our debt, on our books as debt, but it will be revenue that come that we can use to develop this country. So for the NDC to have created the false impression, which led to the suspension of Agyapa, Samson, I submit to you that that is the actual financial loss to the state, because in anticipation of the agreement being passed, if the agreement had passed, the expenditure in the nature now we're talking about 12 billion would have been money well spent, because you would have gone ahead to list Agyapa on the London Stock Exchange and subsequently on the Ghana Stock Exchange, and those monies would have yielded the result that you were seeking.
Bryce Simon just showed you.
What does he say?
That time has proven that would have shortchanged ourselves.
But the point is that those are conjectures. They are not factual. He's not talking about something that has happened. He's talking about possibilities.
No, factual about the price. The price at 200 and the price at 2,000 now. You see, that's not conjecture.
Okay, so Bryce Simmons, well known, he has his facts. But these facts that he's saying are based on certain understanding that for me has not happened. So you can anticipate anything, you can say anything. One, the underwriters, okay, in the process of building the books would suggest a price, okay, based on their audit and all of that, and say, okay, well, this probably is the price for the primary market to begin to invest in the IPO. So if that price goes to market, that actually is just price set based on audit. The market reaction or the market valuation of the share becomes what actually is going to be the price of the day. So you can estimate that it's 200 and you go to market, and because of the attraction, the appreciation of that share or of that company, given that Ghana, number one, we're a gold mining company, one of the largest in the world, people who invest in that space will find the value in investing in a gold mining interest in Ghana where there is gold. So a same company that may come from a non-gold mining company that sets up in an IPO to sell shares, people will not find attractive. So you have an inherent value which the market will place value on. So you can go based on competition. You go to market and say 200, but based on competition, you end up getting more than 200. You probably get at 2,000, you probably get 4,000. But you cannot overestimate.
Or this is a circumstance you say there's no investment that doesn't come with risk anyway.
You can say that very well.
So sometimes it will fluctuate.
Yes.
Sometimes you benefit, like the lithium we were discussing some time ago. We have seen that in recent days, the price has taken a nosedive.
Yes.
But there's a possibility that it
would appreciate again. Time. So Samson, with his wealth of experience, should know that you cannot overestimate the value before you go to market. Whatever you do, you leave a space in anticipation that, okay, what if, because really the whole process can fall flat. If you go and say, well, I'm floating these shares initially for $1,000, and people are like, that's too expensive.
But you must bargain from a point of strength.
But you see, that bargain is with who, right? Is your underwriter estimating the process beforehand. The real bargain happens in the market. And why? Something. Your bargaining power depends on the relationship at the table that you have, right? So you and I, if we're going to bargain for time, and because, let me just use the example, one of your viewers impugned that you are Gabi apologist and therefore you are MPP, I can say that, so because of that leverage, you can give me more time that you give Sami. right? That is a leverage I have at the table. So that leverage is only pronounced when you go to the market. So when people begin to see that, what is the name of the company? Because it's a new company. You have to note that also. It's not a company that is known. And you know, shares of companies that have been proven, that have been on the stock market for years, you go to buy the ass of their shares, they're in the millions, they're in the thousands. But once you're a new company coming to market, you are relatively new, the risk there is high, so you cannot go there and be fronting yourself to say that you have the best deal, and so therefore people should come and buy it, and per share is 1 million.
Yeah, but
you can't do that.
You still have to do that because I mean it's global standard.
Yeah.
In negotiations, we have what we call your BATNA.
Yeah.
That is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So you must always put your best foot forward. So if they say, in a circumstance where you could have 2 billion or even up to 6 billion, you are cheapening yourself for 1 billion.
But that is pronouncing judgment before you go to market. What is stopping Imani from saying that we can have 3 billion? Because anybody can say that. You can actually even say we can get 10 billion.
They just don't say it.
But what is the calculation that shows?
That
calculation has not been proven, because the thing is that it's a future event. And I'm telling you that even at the current estimate of 200, you can go to market and based on demand, even at that 200 per share, you can even get in excess of that 2 billion. I guess you understand. Because you go with 200 and everybody is clamoring for it. And therefore, all of a sudden, by demand, your 200 then become 2 million because everybody wants in on it. You understand? So, Samson, this your show has achieved fame in this country. Today, you have only 3 of us here. But really, you could have 4 people. Simmons was on the internet, right? You could have 4, 5, 6 more people who would want to be on this show because of its repute. What would you have to do then? You have to increase the space you have here. Is that not the case? So that is reality. But what you have chosen to do is to maintain this table so you can have 3 people and the rest can be online. So what I'm saying is that you have to be modest in your expectation going into the market, but you know that the actual valuation of the share price would be based on market valuation, which is driven by demand. And a new company going into a market, you don't have the pull factor of a company that is proven, whose record is out there on the stock market. It's not a secondary market you're going to, it's a primary market. Right. So the people who are coming to buy those shares have risk to consider. So you have to approach it that way. So really, Samson.
So the NDC's demands are unfounded.
It's political. It's completely political. And
you vote for a continuation to perfect the Agyapa deal.
Absolutely. So because really the point here is that stream of revenue, is it useful for us, given our circumstances? Absolutely. The Sami here cheapishly said that, because government didn't see any wisdom in it. They didn't pursue it long enough. Because really what Simpson was saying is not to say that the Agyapa concept was bad. Okay? So for them not to see wisdom even just shows how unappreciative they are of the concept as it stands even now, because they couldn't understand it when they were trying to do it. So as for the NDC, they don't understand the thing, and so therefore they bastardize it. So they are not part of the conversation. We are talking to Ghanaians to say that we are looking as a country to leverage our resources. What Simpson says something about, you can actually go to the market and probably take money, leverage or monetize our gold, which is different from what Agyapa is doing. Monetize it and then take money, and you can get far more than the Agyapa proposition. That is not exactly true, because you know that a mine can close down, and we're here in this country for 4 years, the Ashanti Gold closed down. The royalties you expected, if you had planned with that royalties would not have come.
Interesting.
Okay, so if that is what Simpson is proposing, you will get to a point where you would have gone to take money in expectation that your royalties will keep coming, and for 4 years or so, you won't get them.
Thank you very much.
Simpson, let me just tell you one final thing. When the NDC contemplated this in 2011, where Sami sheepishly say, because we saw no wisdom. Okay, he didn't prepare for that before coming. That's why all that is got to say. But the point is that before they got to the point they got to, okay, because it was a decision of a committee to do that, who did they pay the advisors and the people who were working on it before it got to a point? How much did they pay those people?
What do you know?
I'm just asking.
There's nothing like that. We do not know
because
that
the thing
they
didn't
had
go
got
to
into that
Parliament.
point.
Yes, but it didn't go to Parliament for us to understand what they expend on the thing. But Agyapa had gone to a point where...
No. Did we get to a point where it was the case that some expenditure had already been made?
They should tell us. They should tell us. Because that information is not available. But I can tell you that some advisors worked on this because it's an abstract concept and you need people to work on it. So somebody must have worked on it. And something, even just
entity, what's the name again? Tobias Fedes entity.
Africa.
Yes. Yes, I think
they worked on
I think they did some work.
Okay, so how much did they pay them?
Okay.
And something, just briefly, the man hours, of government officials who sat, contemplate, and then abandoned. The income they earned, who paid for it?
I think the understanding we had was that it was advised against, and even at the level of cabinet, the Attorney General, it was also advised against. That's why they abandoned it.
Yes, but meanwhile, man hours were invested. Advisors were employed to give the advice before it was approved or disapproved.
I'm sure if they are
so therefore, an expenditure.
You'd have heard about it, and by now you'd have been.
But because it didn't come public, but now maybe something. You are very good. Find out who those people are and how much they were paid. But I'm telling you, in closing, to say that something. It has been proven that this Agyapa thing was nothing untoward being done. And the Equal Cost of Justice actually proved that all the noise about it were preemptive attempts to stop the thing from happening. And there was nothing in that to be held in court to be legal and to be right. So therefore, in conclusion, everything the NDC had done...
that argument is on a different plane.
I'm understanding, but I'm just saying...
The fact that the government followed the processes and went to Parliament, that's what the ECOWAS court said.
Exactly.
What do you want us to do?
Exactly. And so if the thing had gone through Parliament, the people's representative approved it, what is the wrong in that? Because that is the government we have. That is how it has to happen. It must go to Parliament.
I'm sorry, we'll not
Parliament
continue
must
this discussion.
approve.
No.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
He has said a lot of things.
But you said a lot of things. I haven't responded to everything.
Yes, Sammy, I'm sorry.
But of course
we have to make progress.
Yeah, you have to do that. He has to do that.
Kwekwe Chibueshaku reminds me something when the issue...
You can do that.
We started the discussion.
For
and he says something. You remember when you hosted Kenneth Ofori-Atta on this issue, I asked if his ministry could provide the nation with a 30-year projection of what the country was going to earn from Agyapa. Does anybody know today? And can Mr. Yangba tell us the quantum of how much Ghana is going to benefit from Agyapa over 20 years, for example? At least we know exactly what we are losing. But can they tell us exactly what we are going to get? I think that is fair. I think that one, when he made this proposition, the finance ministry did something briefly, but it was not concrete enough, and that's why we can't remember now. This show is brought to you by the candid sponsorship of Bank of Africa, as strong as a group and close as a partner. MTN, everywhere you go. Ashasi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider for 33 years plus. My Way Insurance. Dial *165# on MTN to join My Way today. Syntex tanks, it's strong, it's tough. Flamingo paints, simply superior. Sammy, I regret.
Please.
We have less than an hour for the next issues that we have to canvas for our viewers.
Well,
when you
okay,
do,
yes, of course.
So I will
right back.